In this unit, we're going to be discussing matter and the properties of matter. So what is essential to start with is for us to define what matter really is. So matter is something that has mass and takes up space. Okay? So we're going to look at different types of properties of matter. One of the types of properties is the physical properties of matter. And a physical property of matter is a characteristic of the material that you can observe or measure without actually changing the composition of the material. There are all sorts of different types of physical properties, more than are listed here, but we're going to discuss these 6: viscosity, conductivity, malleability, hardness, melting/boiling points, and density. Viscosity is the tendency of a liquid to keep from flowing. So when you say that something is viscous, it means it's thick, like honey or lava. Okay? Something with a very low viscosity is something that's really runny, like water. And as you might imagine, the viscosity of a substance we can change it by changing the temperature. Conductivity is the ability to allow heat or electricity to flow through a material. And any sort of material that allows heat to easily flow or electricity to easily flow is called a conductor. Materials that prevent electricity and heat from flowing are called insulators. Hardness is, and malleability. Hardness first. We'll talk about hardness first. It is comparing the ability of one substance to scratch another. So you may remember from Earth and Environmental Science when you did mineral identification. Part of the mineral identification is called the Mohs hardness scale, and you do a scratch test to see whether or not one material will scratch another. This picture up here shows an image of somebody cutting glass with a diamond-studded X-Acto knife. So diamond is one of the hardest substances or types of matter, and therefore it's able to scratch and cut other types of matter. Okay? Malleability is the ability of a solid to be hammered without shattering. So metals are malleable. Here's a picture of blacksmith. If you heat up metal, you can hammer it and form it into different shapes without it cracking. Okay, now melting/boiling point, I'm sure that we're aware of what this is, but any sort of phase change going from one state of matter to another, like a solid to a liquid or a liquid to a gas, is actually a physical property and a physical change, okay, which might get confusing when we talk about chemical properties here in a second, but we'll distinguish the difference. So I'm sure all of you know melting is when you go from a solid to a liquid, and boiling is when you go from a liquid to gas. Now, another really important property is density, okay? And density is the mass to volume ratio. So the amount of mass or weight something has per the amount of space that it takes up. And we use this typically to measure the purity of a substance. So if you had a ring in the drawer and it was a silver ring, you want to know if it was pure silver, or if it was sterling silver, or if it wasn't silver at all, it was some sort of fake metal, you could measure the density of it and then compare to the known density of the metal. On the reference tables that you have, on the front page of the reference tables, there's a list of a bunch of different metals and what their densities are. And we're going to do a lab where we're going to use density in order to determine the purity of a metal later in the unit. So those are some examples of physical properties, and like I said, there are more than just those 6. Now, the other type of property that we have are chemical properties. Physical properties you can observe without changing a substance, but chemical properties can only be observed when a substance is changed undergoing a chemical reaction. Okay, so there are 4 different indicators of a chemical reaction occurring. The first is the production of a gas. Okay, and typically this can be seen in the form of bubbles, but it also can be a smell that is given off. You can see a colored gas being given off, or even sometimes we do something called a splint test, where we light a stick on fire and see how the gas behaves when it reacts with the flame. So this is where it might be confusing, and I want to distinguish between boiling as a physical property and production of a gas as a chemical property. So if you convert from a liquid to a gas, that is a physical property. So if liquid water turns into water vapor, it's still water. It hasn't undergone a chemical change. It hasn't changed into a new substance. When a gas is produced during a chemical reaction, we're actually making a new gas. You're making carbon dioxide or oxygen, which wasn't originally a reactant in the chemical reaction. Okay. Color change is an indicator of chemical change, and we'll also see here in a second. I'm going to give you a demonstration, and you'll see color change as an example of a chemical reaction. Heat or light being released or absorbed is an indicator of a chemical reaction, and we'll actually do this chemical reaction later in the semester. And then the last one, which you may have never seen before, is called the formation of a precipitate. And a precipitate isn't like what we learn in earth environmental science. It's not rain or something like that. A precipitate is actually when a solid comes from a liquid. So a solid forms out of two liquids being mixed together. And here in this picture you can see you have a yellow liquid being added to a clear liquid, and you see a red solid forming. And I'm going to give you an example of that right now. Okay, so you can see it for yourself. Alright. Let's make it big. Okay, so I just have a beaker here, and I'm going to add a few drops of a chemical. This is actually potassium iodide, and you can't see it, it's clear. I'm just going to add some until it's sort of covered the bottom. Okay, so now it's covering the bottom there. And then I'm going to add a few drops of something called lead nitrate, and you'll see what happens. Alright, so as I add the drop, you can see immediately that a yellow solid forms. Okay, so we see in this example, we see both color change as well as formation of a precipitate. And you'll get to do chemical reactions that form precipitates later in the semester.